Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, dude?
Not too much, man. Today we're going to be chatting about a federal crisis prediction report warning that billionaire overlords, misinformation, ecosystem collapse, and the end of democracy could be near. A liberal government signaling citizenship for all illegal immigrants. A quarter of Ontario students over 12 reporting recreational opioid use. The WHO's global pandemic treaty falling apart for now. The Liberals pouring billions into EVs, but Canadians aren't buying into the green transition. And ahead of Pride Month, some school walkouts are planned. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind leaving us a kind review on Spotify or subscribing to our YouTube channel wherever you're watching, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get started. All right, first off, we've got a federal crisis prediction report warning that billionaire overlords, misinformation, ecosystem collapse, and the end of democracy could be near, according to a federal panel tasked with envisioning 35 quote-unquote plausible catastrophes. Truth could become indistinguishable from lies in 2.5 years. Cyber attacks could disable critical infrastructure in 4 years. Billionaires could be running the world in 4.5 years, and vital natural resources could run short in 8 years. Policy Horizons Canada, a federal policy advisory body, created this list of threats, ranking them by potential impact and timelines. The top 10 threats include ecosystem collapse, artificial intelligence run amok, healthcare system collapse, overwhelming emergency responses, widespread downward mobility, and a total breakdown of democracy. So, do these crisis predictions have any merit, or is this just fear-mongering to justify more authoritarian power grab?
This is mostly ridiculous fear-mongering nonsense that I believe will just be used to usher in totalitarian measures to, save democracy. Look, the world is already run by billionaires, so that's a stupid concern. It's already very clear that's exactly what's happening. And Canada has an enormous abundance of natural resources, so when they say, hey, we're going to run out of this and this is going to be the crisis in the next 8 years, how is it possible? We're leading the way on so many things. We have 320 billion trees, the fourth most fresh water. We lead in a bunch of mineral categories for mining. We have the most natural gas and the third most oil. We're not running out of natural resources. In fact, we're not leveraging them enough. And then when it comes to the most imminent threat, misinformation, the whole misinformation narrative is a clear push to just force censorship, right? They want a world where only their information is allowed. It's very, very Orwellian. And then they kind of get to this breakdown of democracy. The breakdown of democracy is entirely their doing, right? Democracy means rule by the people. So maintaining it means preserving power to the people, having freedom of choice, having freedom of speech, assembly, religion, things like that. The only real threat to democracy comes from the government itself, with its, very oppressive, not only media narrative strategy, but also the accompanying policy that is itself oppressing us. Now, I did start a list of some crisis predictions that I actually have, so I'm just going to rip through those. Censorship and the removal of free speech. This is a real concern because it's accompanied by disproportionately harsh penalties. So this is something we need to legitimately be concerned about. The introduction of CBDCs. We all know what digital currencies are going to do and how they can affect your life and the power that it gives governments. We already know that we've seen this happen through the pandemic. It'll just be 10 times worse when everything's digital. A surveillance state paired with a social credit system. That's a huge concern because it's already happening in China, and we're moving in that direction at a lightning pace. So I'm a little concerned about that. The expansion of power by global governing bodies like the WHO, especially through things like the pandemic treaty, which luckily just fell apart. But seeing those governing bodies grow and their power grows is a legitimate concern for people. The cost of living crisis. This is leading citizens to depend more on the government. Again, very much leading to sort of that universal basic income, which I think is, again, a huge problem. Climate change initiatives limiting movement and our quality of life. Climate's always changing. It's always happening. We know that. But the way that they're approaching it in the Western world, especially in Canada, is damaging our quality of life. And their next move is to limit our movement. And then, finally, the actual fall of democracy. But I believe that's via extensive government overreach. So those are my list of these are the real problems we have.
I don't think we've ever actually truly had democracy either. That idea that everyone's vote would be equal to one another's and the government is ruled by the people. I don't think anybody is buying that when, yes, billionaires are definitely have way more sway in our political systems than the average person. There's definitely no 1-to-1 ratio there. But then even too, you think about it and you go, okay, from a technical standpoint, if the government is supposed to be a representation of the people and the people are in charge of the government in a idealistic democracy, so to say, in that scenario, there could be no innocence. Because look, if your government does something, like, how can you say that if, let's say, a war happens and it's like, okay, we are going to try to avoid civilian casualties? Well, that government, that military is directly actually at their helm. The people are in charge of it. So they would actually share a lot of responsibility in that action. But I don't think anybody actually buys that. Nobody would say, yeah, that military or that government is actually definitely acting on my best interests, and or I'm in control of it. So right there, right then and there, the idea kind of gets onto shaky ground. But then too, when you look at any time they do regime changes in other countries, they always talk about how it's democracy. It's like, oh, we need to uphold democracy in the world. I think it was a year or two ago, Biden was doing this big speech talking about how there's less democracies in the world today than there was 15, 20 years ago. And it's like, yeah, but also, like, you guys have had zero respect for democracies if they didn't elect the leader that you liked. So just this whole ideal of, like, them using democracy in order to usher in authoritarianism, it's like, I don't get how so many people are buying this when, yeah, they look at things like even what's happening down in the States. It's like, vote for this guy, otherwise democracy fails. You're like,
it's such a broken narrative. It's such weird double speak. I don't think very many people fall for it, though. I think you kind of get people that are caught up in partisanship, or they're just political zealots in one area or another, one sort of side or the other, rather. And then they buy into that stuff. But anybody with half a brain is like, wait a minute. So if I use my democratic votes for this guy, we're going to lose democracy? Can you explain that? They can't. There's no reason. There's no reason they should be saying anything like this. But it's a good point you make that they're using, they say democracy, and they are slowly ushering in authoritarian measures within our own nations. But then, like you said, you look if they don't like whoever's in charge in the Middle East or in any other country, they penalize them and they go in there and they try to change it. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. Sometimes there are totalitarian or authoritarian leaders that are doing wild shit and affecting a lot of people. Maybe they should be stopped, but do it because they should be stopped, not because you're saving democracy. Kind of dilutes the whole idea, right? You see the same thing in the EU. I actually think the European Union is becoming a very dangerous authoritarian group. And maybe they've been like this the whole time and I'm just becoming aware of it. But what they did with Poland, how they froze $9 billion worth of their assets because they didn't like the government. They go, well, you're not pro-EU, so we're going to freeze all your assets. And now they've got a pro-EU leader. They just give them back. Same thing they're doing with Hungary. They're like, $10 billion worth of assets or more, we're just going to freeze them because you're not doing what we want. What the fuck? But, I was actually thinking about it when you said, we vote in this leader to sort of uphold democracy. I think if they wanted to have a legitimate democracy, they would let society vote on policy to policy. That's a real democracy, in my opinion, where you've got people that are there managing the day-to-day and the administrative stuff. But anytime there's major policy, everything is a referendum vote. That's democracy. If we started doing that, I'd have some faith in the system. Until then, though, it's all some sort of authoritarian measure dressed up as a democracy.
People get too caught up and they get into this path of just being like, okay, well, what we have is you can't question the current system of democracy that we have at all. And I do like that Winston Churchill quote where, he says, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried.
Nice.
And
that's so good. Yeah.
It is true.
It is 100%.
But like, if we're going to make improvements, especially on the democratic front, then you first have to be able to criticize what's there. And you go, okay, like, how could we actually bolster this and make it more, to use their term, equitable for us as citizens?
Yep.
Moving on to the second story for the day, we've got the Liberal government signaling citizenship for all illegal immigrants. The Liberal government is considering a plan proposed by Immigration Minister Mark Miller to grant legal status to all illegal immigrants in Canada. This comes after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau acknowledged that Canada's immigration system has admitted more people than the country's infrastructure can accommodate. When asked about the number of illegal immigrants in Canada and potential future arrivals, Saeed Hussain, executive director of the Migrant Rights Network, stated that there are no reliable estimates, but suggested that there could be up to 500,000 illegals in Canada. Hussain emphasized that this issue is about equality and argued that denying legal status to all would be racist and discriminatory. So is this just pure delusion, or is there a legitimate political strategy here?
Okay, both. The guy's purely delusional to say shit like that. But there is a good political strategy here. So I gave this some thought, and I think it's actually a clever move by the Liberals, because if there are in fact 500,000 illegal immigrants in Canada, many of them have friends and family who are already citizens. Guaranteed. Probably multiple. So those 500,000 people could be responsible for a bubble of 3 to 4 million voters. So by formally proposing legislation to grant legal status to all legal immigrants and letting it proceed through the House, they obviously stand to attract a rather large number of voters in the next election. So if Trudeau wins, this would secure their path to citizenship, right? If he doesn't, then it serves as ammunition to further divide the country, with the Conservatives being labeled as xenophobes or some other misguided labels. So I actually think it is a good political strategy.
To your point about, getting labeled xenophobes or this or that or alt-right extremists and all of this kind of stuff, this is a very big case of the pot calling the kettle black here. Because if you're going to label anybody an extremist, maybe it's the political party that thinks it should just grant citizenship to any illegals that are here. And, you constantly hear this phrase that goes around in the pro open borders world where it's like, no human is illegal. And it's like, go try that in any other country but a Western one. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to sit here and say that we need to be like that. If we don't let in everybody, that we're an inherently racist country or whatever it is, or evil country, when no other country for all of history has operated on these ideals. Like,
it's so misguided.
It's kind of like when you call somebody stupid, if they just turn around and say that you're stupid back, it doesn't land, right? Everybody just goes, you're kind of proving his point. You couldn't come up with your own comeback.
Unless you're 4 years old, don't say that.
Yeah. But it's the exact same issue here where it's like, okay, you call as long as you just label everybody extremists, or you're wanting to ruin the country.
Yeah, you sort of take that ammo away from them. Yeah, good call.
When you and I sit there and then say like, wait a second, these guys are the freaking extremists.
Gaslighting, dude.
Then people are like, no, they've already labeled you that, and it doesn't work as well. So in separate but related news, Immigration Minister Mark Miller admitted that Canada does not require criminal background checks for international students, even if the individuals have never been there. Miller also suggested that reducing temporary residence could be achieved by granting them permanent residence status. Like, okay, we have so many people in this country. What are we going to do about it to fix it? Let them stay here forever.
Make them Canadians. Problem solved.
What the hell, man?
The big thing is that people aren't realizing is how the boots meet the ground on this. We are, from an infrastructure perspective, falling apart. Healthcare is falling apart. Our housing's falling apart. Our economy's falling apart. If you continue to pour more fuel on that fire, it's just going to get bigger. And I feel like that's just the one big thing that they're ignoring. Like, what I will give the Liberals credit for is they're able to have these conversations in these little pockets where they don't consider anything else, but nothing is independent. Everything is connected in some way or another. And this is connected to everything. This is what is making, look, I don't want to sound xenophobic, but if you keep pouring more people, I don't care where they're coming from, into this country, it's just going to get worse for now. That doesn't mean I'm anti-immigration. I'm pro-immigration, as long as it's paired with the pace with which you can expand your infrastructure. This is just fucking everybody's lives up.
There's a reason that when you're on a plane, they tell you to put your mask on before everyone, because you're no good to everyone else if you're dead.
Exactly.
So I look at this is very similar, where it's like, okay, sure, if you want to help people from the other side of the planet, like, that's great. I mean, I just met somebody and been talking to somebody that came through from Ukraine. They were pretty much right in the actual military issue there. Like, their whole city has been more or less destroyed. And so, like, it is, you hear these stories and you're like, yeah, okay, I can, from a humanitarian perspective, I can completely agree that I think we should do what we can to help these people, but you're not helping anybody. You're not helping Canadians. You're not helping these people if you allow that to happen at a rate which the opportunities here and the services that we're supposed to be so thankful for, like our healthcare system and such, just utterly crumble under the pressure. At that point, it actually does harm to everybody. And, even talking to that person that I'm referencing, she was saying very similarly, like, there's a very false idea of what Canada is like on the international stage, where everyone thinks it is this very economically prosperous country and there's so much opportunity here and everyone does so well. And she was actually even mentioning that her family was saying that they think they might be hiding cash because they're like, Canadians make so much money. How do you not have more to send us back home? And it's just like, no. Like, we're not making nearly as much money as you think we are. So there is this like complete flip of what it's actually like. We've even seen more and more too, like even whether it be immigrants from, say, India, like these people come over here thinking there would be like a plethora of opportunity for things like STEM fields and all of this, but then they end up working 60 hours a week at Tim Hortons to pay for a apartment that costs $2,500 a month to rent. I made a video on Instagram the other day talking about like how I genuinely find more agreement with immigrants these days on the state of Canada than I do with people that were born and raised here. And I think it's kind of coming from this idea of where like people that were born and raised here that were very proud of Canada or still are, they don't want to admit that that's gone.
They don't want to let it go. It's like changing their identity. It's like having to change their opinions or identity. It's so hard.
It's
right?
like being in a toxic relationship and then just like being like, but the first month we spent together was so magical. And it's like, no, but let's also like just admit that like this relationship now has just become complete utter chaos.
That's exactly that's the same thing I say. I use the relationship all the time with Canada. It's like I was married to Canada for a lot of years, and then she sucked someone else's dick. So I'm like, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. I'm sorry. I don't care how good it was or how you are going to fix things. It's too fucking late. That's how I see it. But I think a lot of people have trouble getting there. Like you said, I think they're proud, it's patriotism, it's opinion, it's heritage, it's their history, their past, whatever. So people have a hard time letting that go. You and I don't, because you and I can be pragmatic. And a lot of people that are emigrating from this country, a lot of them come from places where things were quite bad. So they see the writing on the wall. They're like, no, guys, this is moving in the wrong direction quickly. One of my good friends, his wife is from Croatia, and they left during a war in the 90s. And she sees things that are happening now. And she, for like, pretty much on all accounts, I'd say she's liberal. I know he is. Have really good conversation. Very, very, very good people. But now, over the last couple of years, she's like, no, we have to leave this country. It's gone too far, and I know where this is going, and this is not good. So, I'm inclined to agree with you. I tend to see the world a lot more similarly to people that just got to this country that have been here their whole lives.
To put it in perspective, this person's sister had said that they desperately want to go back to Ukraine. Like, can you imagine that? Like, things are so bad here that they're like, you know what? I'll take the war-torn country. Yeah. Like, our country is currently being invaded and being used as a battleground for two world superpowers
that have no interest in dropping the war or finding peace whatsoever anytime soon.
And I'd rather live there than here because this is just insane.
That's that. If you needed a sign that things are moving in the wrong direction, there you go.
Yeah, and well, they're just gonna toss more and more gasoline on the fire as well, because now Canada is expanding its Gaza refugee admissions from 1,000 up to nearly 20,000 or more. So Immigration Minister Mark Miller recently announced that the applications for Canada's quote-unquote temporary resident visa program for Palestinians would be increased from 1,000 applicants to 5,000 families starting Monday. Palestine had an average household size of 5.1 in 2017. So with these new measures, it's likely that the number of Gazan refugees will hit 20,000 or more. Under the program, Palestinians who live in Gaza and have relatives who are either Canadian citizens or permanent residents will be eligible to move to Canada and stay for up to 3 years. Palestinians accepted will also be able to apply for a fee-exempt study permit or a fee-exempt open work permit after entering Canada.
You know what? I did a little bit of research on this because I don't know. I couldn't think of the best way to just be like, hey, this could be a problem. Because people will go like, again, xenophobic, racist, whatever. So I just wanted to look at some numbers. So I think, like I say, data doesn't lie, people do. So there was a lot of polls that have been done, but two very recent ones. And here's what they said. 72% of respondents in Palestine said they believed the Hamas decision to launch the cross-border rampage in southern Israel on October 7th was correct. So 72% in Palestine agree that was the right move. Okay, here's the other one. 59% of Palestinians believe that Hamas should govern the Gaza Strip when the war ends. So that gives you an idea of what the people of Palestine think and what they believe. And then I kind of broke it down and I explained a little bit of like, what Hamas is and what they sort of represent and, their ideology. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they seek a Palestinian state governed by Islamic Sharia law, which is super aggressive and not very friendly to women. And I think people don't realize, people that are supporting it, they don't understand these numbers, right? And the other thing too that they maybe really aren't 100% aware of is that Hamas's primary goal is to have all the land in Israel and Palestine. And that's where I think you see from the river to the sea. I think that's where you see a lot of that come to life. I don't think people really understand, A, what the intentions of Hamas are, B, how many people there support it, right? So, look, what I'll say is, I don't believe that all Gazans seeking refuge will be jihadists. That's insane. I don't think that at all. In fact, I imagine that the large majority of them are looking for safety, shelter, and opportunity. That's what I actually think, because I do think most people are good. You can support someone because maybe the opposition's not that great, right? Maybe you go, it's Hamas, but if it's not Hamas, it's another group that in their mind could be worse. So what I'm saying is, I'm not trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do think it's important to understand the motivations behind many current citizens of Gaza and what kind of problems Canada may be welcoming into the country.
Yeah, so to put a number on it, because you talked about how even just governing by Sharia law is very popular in those areas of the world. A survey in 2013 by Pew Research found that 89% of Palestinians support the idea that laws and governance should be based on the principles of Islam. So we need to separate a little bit between different camps in the Muslim world a little bit here, because you've got the jihadists, which is jihad in Arabic means spiritual struggle, which also translates to holy war. So jihadists believe that they will bring liberation to the Arab world through holy war. Most Muslim countries and people that live in them don't actually really support a lot of these groups like, say, ISIS and such. However, like you were pointing out, in Palestine, this is a very radicalized population. This is not like Palestine, and their sentiments are not directly correlated with other Arab nations like, say, Saudi Arabia. They're not, it's not the same.
That may be why they're not being let into a lot of these other countries.
110% it is, because also the reason that, yes, neighboring Arab nations don't accept Palestinian refugees is because there has been historical uprisings and revolutions against them. So, for instance, in September 1970, there was a period known as Black September, where the Jordanian army clashed with Palestinian Liberation Organization forces, resulting in a full-fledged civil war in Jordan. And this involved the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine seizing 3 civilian passenger flights and forcing their landing in the Jordanian city of Zarqa. Then they also took the foreign nationals as hostages and blew up the planes in front of the international press. So, and this has also happened, there's also been issues within Lebanon and Syria and such as well. So a lot of these places, and this is where you can actually legitimately have a lot of compassion for the Palestinian people, is neighboring countries like, say, Lebanon and mainly Iran. They've been using, in Syria as well, they've been using Palestine as essentially a proxy for fighting Israel, right? So they radicalize these groups, then they arm these groups, and then they send these groups to war against Israel. So the way that I look at this isn't necessarily like it's a bunch, like the Palestinians are just, they naturally came about this way. It's like, no, they have been brainwashed by other militant groups within the area to act as more or less their muscle. To put it in perspective of just how crazy these, like, the radicalization is in these areas, 2013 survey by Pew Research found that 40% of respondents in both Gaza and the West Bank, so if you were to take Gaza on its own, it's actually going to be higher because Gazans are typically more violent than the West Bank.
They're run by the Hamas. The West Bank is not.
Yeah. So when you take just Palestinians on large, 40% of respondents said they believe that suicide bombings can often or sometimes be justified to defend Islam from its enemies. So, who would be considered enemies of Islam?
Currently,
infidels, aka non-believers, aka anyone non-Muslim,
aka
us.
Everyone.
Us.
Yeah.
Like, so you look at this and you go like, look, let's be incredibly gracious to these numbers and say, okay, let's say we pick the cream of the crop of Gazans. Okay, if if these numbers are saying 71% support the October 7th and 40% support suicide bombings, well then let's say we pick the cream of the crop and we get rid of half of those and we pick the best half or whatever.
Sure.
You're still going to get roughly, like, even best case scenario, 10 to 20% of those people will justify suicide bombings, and 35% would justify October 7th. And you're just like, what do they think is going to happen?
What do they think we're bringing here? And it's all like, oh, no, we need to do that. We really don't. We really don't, actually. And I find it pretty alarming that we've got, they manage diplomatic relationships with all these other countries, and they can't manage to get some of these Palestinians into neighboring countries. You gotta pay more attention, not you, but I mean in general, people have to pay more attention to what that means. Like, that is a very clear sign that this is not a good move.
Mm-hmm.
Yet here we are. And we're not only increasing the number from 1,000, what originally was to 5,000, it's up to 20,000 or more. And who's responsible if something does happen? Because
the liberals.
Odds are it's going to. Like statistically speaking, odds are something will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because, not for nothing, if you're looking for some reason or some cause or some way to piggyback your ambitions coming from Gaza, and you see all these protests here, and you see all this support and all this current anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic speech that's happening, you just embolden these people when they get here. It's like, oh, you guys are down, you guys support our cause. Amazing, let's go. You know what I mean? It may be one of those things where rather than reform, it's just radicalized.
Did you see what happened at the Liberal MP's office? Julie Dershowitz? She's the Parliament for Davenport. So people vandalized her office building and wrote on her windows in what looks like blood. It's not actual blood, but they made it look that way. And it says, "Rafah is burning, Toronto will too."
Oh my God, they spelled Rafah wrong. Fucking morons.
So it's like, there's already threats being made. And what I can't stand about all of this is just the insane double standard that comes down, where Canadian protesters, like the Freedom Convoy, they set up bouncy castles, they have cookouts, they're having coffee and sing-alongs. Crime rates drop in Ottawa while they're protesting. Like, downtown actually gets safer. These people get labeled dangerous extremists that we need to invoke emergencies acts for
and not tolerate,
and war measures for, to not tolerate and to stamp out because they're so goddamn dangerous. But then when you see things like this, where there's legitimate threats being made and saying, like, we're going to burn Toronto to the ground for this, something that Canada, I'm sorry, what's happening over there, it's not Canada's fault. So then if you even just point this out, then you're an Islamophobe, right? You're a xenophobic. And what I think the purpose of labeling people with that isn't an actual argument against those people, but it's a threat to everybody else that is listening. So let's say you and I have this conversation right now. 100%. Like, I've already got the infinity gauntlet of racist, misogynist, transphobic, right? And it's like after this conversation, like, my infinity gauntlet is full. I just got Islamophobic for sure, right? I'm just like full on powered up with hate. But they throw these labels on them not to argue me or not to try to make me
scare other people away from getting into the conversation and opposing it. But you know what's interesting, guys? I was having a chat last week with a buddy of mine who's a liberal, and you still ask them about the Freedom Convoy, and they have nothing but bad things to say about it. They vilify it. Those people are dangerous. They shouldn't have done this. Everything was like their version of reality is so distorted because of how much control the liberals have over the media. It's insane. But it's such a disservice to Canadians. That's why, I continue to say the government's most powerful weapon is the media. And in Canada, we just continue to basically further nationalize it. You know what I mean? But this is where you get these opinions and these narratives. And this is why people are like, oh no, it's the right thing to do. It's like, well, actually, if you look at the data and pay attention, it's the wrong thing to do. Same thing with the Freedom Convoy and a lot of other things. If you manipulate the media, you can just convince anybody of anything, basically, if that's where you get all your information from. So it's this weird thing, right? Like, I bet if something bad does happen, this will be spun and somehow be a conservative problem. Guaranteed.
And you know what? For actually most of those people, I could actually respect if somebody says, I didn't like the Freedom Convoy and it passed a line for me. It went on too long. It took up too much space, blah, 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 right? Okay, make that point. And I could actually maybe even agree with you on some things.
Yeah.
Maybe I could probably find some agreement. But what you're doing there is now you've set a precedent. Now, any other issue that ever goes past that line you have now drawn, which was the Freedom Convoy in the future, then you need to be just as critical, if not more.
I actually agree with you. It's one of those things where you're looking at what's happening with, pretty much any liberal policy that has to do with immigration right now, and these kinds of refugee strategies, and these like the writing on that politician's wall. Where is the same level of frustration with the issue? Why are you not pushing back? Why are you not up in arms? Why are you not frustrated or angry about this? But you think it's for some reason justified. But like you said, this isn't Canada's problem. Why are we behaving this way? But it's that double standard. But again, I think this kind of comes back to what I said a little bit earlier. You and I live in more of the libertarian space, but we are politically agnostic. We don't give a fuck. It comes down to policy. It comes down to what your plan is and what you're doing and what you've done. But I would say like 80% of people really buy into partisan, or really they buy into one side. I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, whatever it is. And they just get swallowed up by it, right? Like I even see it with my parents. Love them to death, but like it's been very challenging pulling my dad out of sort of that liberal mindset because it's not what it once was. But they opinionate, like their identity is so built on that one thing that they refuse to see the other side, right? So it's kind of like confirmation bias, I guess. Anyway.
Is that great? I think it was Mark Twain. He said, it's easier to fool somebody than to convince them they've been fooled, right? And
absolutely.
That's 100% because it's an ego hit then too, right? It's okay, I got something wrong. Like if changing your mind on, let's say you've been a lifelong liberal, changing your mind on the Liberal Party. Again, I voted for the Liberal Party in the past. And so it's like, if you change your mind, you're admitting that you might have had something wrong in that issue, or that you didn't perceive things as they really were. And most people can't do that.
Which is so weird because it's such a natural thing for me, but I think it's because I've made so many mistakes. Like I've fucked up so much stuff and failed so many times and fallen on my face in so many instances that I just don't care. I'm like, I really focus on progress and truth. Whereas like my identity, I've shattered it 100 times over. I just don't care.
Yeah. And I look at a lot of that stuff very much like tools. Like all this information and knowledge in general is a tool. And if somebody comes along and let's say I'm trying to build a house with everything, with all my knowledge or whatever, and I'm using like a hand saw to cut 2x4s, and somebody comes across with a table saw and says, hey, you could use this. This is a much better tool for you. I'd be a goddamn idiot to sit there and be like, sorry, my equipment's a lot better than what you got over there, and just like turn a blinder on, and just because you can't admit that maybe you're using a tool that isn't actually that beneficial for you.
Totally agreed. Just want to highlight though, wouldn't be super good idea to use a table saw to cut 2x4s. You want to use a skill saw, but a table saw is better than a hand saw. But just
maybe I should have went for an analogy of something I actually understand other than construction. These are not working man hands. I can tell you that. These are book highlighting hands. All right. So our next topic for the day, we've got a quarter of Ontario students over 12 reported recreational opioid use. A frightening new statistic sheds light on how the deadly opioid crisis is impacting Canadian youth. The recreational use of opioids among junior high and high school students during the past year in Ontario has surged from 12.7% in 2021 to 21.8% in 2023, an increase of 9.1%, according to the Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey. While 21.8% of students between grades 7 and 12 reported non-medical opioid use within the last year, 26.4% of the same cohort have tried opioids for a non-medical purpose at least once in their lives. The only type of quote-unquote drug analyzed with a higher lifetime usage for students was alcohol. So how do we lay out a better path for the youth here? Because they're clearly suffering from understandable anxiety about the future that's been laid out before them, and then also being crushed by this overwhelming sense of nihilism.
I actually think you're going too deep. I don't think you have to worry about the psyche of these young kids as much as you need to put a better system in place so they can't get their hands on this shit. Kids will just do whatever's around.
I don't think so.
Oh, they will. Kids will 100%. What do you mean? They get their hands on opioids, they do them. 100%. It's recreational use. They're not doing it to kill the pain, dude. They're doing it because it's available. They're doing it like this is almost as high as alcohol now. So I'm of the opinion like you can focus on the psychological stuff, and maybe you could take your foot off the gas on some of the ideological stuff you're putting in schools, because I think that is very harmful. But there's no way some 13-year-old is like, oh, the world war, I'm going to do some opioids. They don't give, that's not what's happening. These kids are getting access to these things because they're being used recreationally. That's the point here. It's not for medicinal purpose, right? So my concern here is that this is going to be a generational problem. These kids are going to suffer significantly because of what's happening right now. I did a little bit of research to understand the long-term ramifications. So the first thing I did was research alcohol addiction. And what it shows is that teens who begin drinking before age 15 are 5 times more likely to develop alcohol dependence than those who wait until they're 21. 5 times. Up to 12% of youth aged 12 to 20 meet the criteria for alcohol abuse or alcohol dependence. So the reason I checked alcohol was because recreational opioid use was so close, obviously, but also because there's no definitive statistics for the long-term outcome of childhood opioid use. In other words, this is the first time this has happened. So we're watching this science experiment play out. But here's what we do know. Studies suggest that taking opioids for even a short period, especially before the age of 21, significantly raises the risk of long-term use and addiction. And opioids can lead to dependence within 4 to 8 weeks of use, creating a strong physical urge to continue taking them to avoid withdrawal. So you look at where this is going, and sure, you can focus on the ideological stuff, but you got to get it out of their hands. You got to get it out of the hands of these kids, and you got to get it out of the hands of a lot of these adults. I don't know why so many adults are hooked on or using opioids. This is ridiculous. Sorry, but I mean, it is. This is, and look, I don't want to blame the individual that's hooked on something or that's taking something for pain. I don't want to do that. I want to blame the system for allowing this to be the solution, not realizing what it's actually doing to people. 20% of people that take opioids get addicted to them for a medicinal purpose. 20% get addicted. That's insane. If you see that figure, take them off the fucking shelf.
Yeah. No, hey, I agree. Accessibility is a massive issue, and you can deal with that as well. But 5 times as many high school and college students are dealing with anxiety and other mental health issues as youth of the same period during the Great Depression. So
I'm not denying what you're saying. I'm saying that it's being used recreationally, so I wouldn't put these in the same category, but continue.
But that is what recreational drug use is mostly for.
No, recreational drug use is to go have fun with kids and be a goof. You never take, one was, sorry,
there's medical and there's recreational. There's recreational, which is I use this because I enjoy using it. And then there's medical, which is I use this because it has a medical benefit to me.
There's medical because there's a reason for taking it medically. There's a reason for taking it recreationally when you don't need it for a medical purpose.
When has there ever been a differentiation between using something recreationally or for self-harm purposes?
What do you mean?
Like when have you ever seen any statistics or anything differentiate between people who use drugs because they like to recreationally and it's fun, or because they use drugs because they're depressed and it alleviates that pain? Those both fall under recreation.
No, they don't. Because actually, if you have depression, you can go get a fucking prescription rather for this stuff. Fuck.
Not opioids.
No, for a lot of these things you can.
SSRIs,
yes. Sure, but I mean,
those aren't opioids.
But the thing is, you're suggesting that kids are so overwhelmed by the world that they're taking opioids to deal with depression.
Okay, let me ask you.
I don't think so.
Okay.
You don't even know that. I don't think you really even have those emotions like that when you're that, unless your wiring is a little off or you have hormonal issues. That I get.
So, okay. So why did you do any hard drugs during high school?
Not till I was 18. Like I ate mushrooms and smoked weed, but I didn't do hard drugs till I was 18.
Okay. So why didn't you?
Didn't have access to them.
Okay. I had access to them.
Okay.
I could have 100% gotten whatever, cocaine or any of these issues. No.
Were you a nerd?
I'm not a nerd. But what I'm saying is, there's obviously something here other than just accessibility, because again, I think people can have access to drugs and not want to use them.
Okay, so then here's a question for you. Kids drink alcohol. Did you drink alcohol when you were a kid?
Not until like grade 11 or 12.
Right, so I started drinking, I think the first time I drank, I was like 13, 14, and then I drank at parties. My sister was older, so I hung out with an older crowd. Grade 9, 10, 11, 12, I was drinking at parties all the time, recreationally, for fun. Because that's what we did. We also smoked weed for fun. We also ate mushrooms for fun.
Why didn't you do heroin for fun?
Because it was, first of all, it wasn't accessible. And I don't really think, like I had the wherewithal at that age to be like, no, I don't want to venture into that game because it's pretty dangerous. But if mom and dad have a prescription for something that they're taking and it's fun, well, then let's take them. You know how many people just raid their parents' medicine cabinet? All I'm saying is they're doing it because they're trying to have a good time. That's what I bet 90+% of this is kids just looking to have a good time. That's why they compared it to alcohol. People don't drink from their kids because they have to drink their sorrows away. What a tough life. They're going to go have fun. That's what they do. They abuse it when they're young because that's the nature of finding your relationship with most things like that. but it's not because they're ideologically captured by all these problems. That's not why.
Well, yeah, but like it's they're trying to inundate themselves with pleasure or whatever. But
Sure.
so do a lot of people. The reason that a lot of people, like even consistently, like the people that I know, let's say in their late 20s or early 30s that still party like crazy, they're not happy people. They do that because they tell themselves like, okay, I want to go to this party because it's going to be fun, or I want to hit that nightclub and stay out till 4 a.m., 5 a.m. doing blow because it's
Sure.
fun.
Yeah,
But
I don't think so.
But it's because you're depressed and you can't sit in a room with yourself and your own thoughts for fucking 10 minutes without all of a sudden needing to numb that with whether it be alcohol or drugs.
Sure. Significant difference, though, between a 13, 15, and 18-year-old, people in that age group exploring drugs and building their relationship with alcohol and having fun and doing that versus someone in their early 30s who can't get their shit together. That's a very different thing. Comparing those two things is not fair because this is the introductory stage when you're just figuring it all out and having fun and getting a little carried away. Here is like you understand what you're doing. You know what you should be doing. You know what your life should be like, but instead you numb the pain. Those are very different things.
Even when you look at just child suicide rates. And I think actually a lot of this can be chalked up to technology as well. Like, I mean, we know the effects that social media is having on kids, but like whether it be like the Jonathan Hates of the world or whatever, all of them are saying like there is something deeply troubling going on with our children.
I agree. I just don't think that they're using opioids recreationally to solve their own problems. That's not how they're doing it. Otherwise, they'd be addicted to it and they'd be using them consistently. That's not what these statistics are sort of suggesting. I just don't think it's how. Plus, how would you even get your hands on it consistently if that was your way of coping? Nope. It's a party drug.
Disagree on this one, but we'll move on before we just butt heads here down the street. All right, and for our next story for the day, we've got the WHO's Global Pandemic Treaty falling apart for now. After more than 2 years of negotiations, rich and poor countries have failed to agree on a global treaty for handling future pandemics. This setback means that a comprehensive plan for responding to the next pandemic, like COVID-19, will have to wait. On Friday, Roland Dries, co-chair of WHO's negotiating board, said, quote, "We are not where we hoped we would be when we started this process," emphasizing the critical need for an international agreement to respond to pandemics, quote, "for the sake of humanity." Precious Matsato, the other co-chair of WHO's negotiating board, remained hopeful about reaching an agreement. She emphasized that efforts would continue despite the current impasse. Tedros, the head of the WHO, stressed the importance of learning from the experience and moving forward. Quote, "What matters now is when do we learn from this and how can we reset things, recalibrate things, identify the main challenges, and then move on." So is this a win for liberty?
It's a short-term win, rather unexpected win, to be honest with you. The reason I say that is because there was a massive power grab available here for the WHO and an opportunity to really centralize a lot of power with a global governing body. It was pretty egregious, some of the things that were in this. So I'm not exactly sure why it fell apart. They say it's small things like that it was just minor issues they couldn't come to terms with. I don't think that was the case. I think they had too big a pushback from too many countries. Like I know the US looks like they were going to argue it. Biden was pushing for it, but by the time it came in, Trump would have dropped it in a heartbeat for sure. Then you look at the UK, they were not interested. Slovakia was not interested. That president got shot 5 times though, maybe because of that. I don't know, hard to say. But this is a significant power grab. So I'm actually surprised it fell apart. That being said, don't get on your heels because they're coming back at you pretty quick here. I just hope it takes them long enough to get organized. So what they said was, well, we're trying to move this along within 2 years, the treaty. That's the fastest ever. They're saying, holy shit, these guys are, the amount of bureaucracy it blows my mind. But that would have been the fastest treaty completed, I think, ever. It was an ambitious target. And I guess my point here is I'm hopeful that it takes them long enough to get ready for round 2 or 3, whatever round it is for this stupid thing, that we have new leaders in place. Because one of the big things, obviously Trump is going to say no. So that is really going to hurt the treaty. Because if you don't have US support, a lot of other nations are going to be emboldened to say no or will back out. And if you have Pierre Poilievre in, he too will have to say no because a lot of things he's standing for right now are pushing back against these global governing bodies. So that's kind of my hope. My hope is that it's a small win for now, but if it takes them long enough to kind of get their shit together, that we have other leadership in place to maybe kind of get rid of the whole thing.
Hopefully that's the scenario. But one thing that kind of concerns me on this front is you constantly hear them say like, we need to learn from COVID-19 and improve for the next pandemic. But they still haven't admitted any of their faults for how they dealt with COVID. Like, what okay, what were the big lessons that we should have learned from COVID? Lockdowns didn't fucking work. They caused way more issues than they solved. 2, masking children and turning them into essentially panic mode and taking them out of school had massive effects on their development. And then 3, the whole mass vaccination thing, how do I say this without getting taken down off of YouTube?
Was a bad idea.
None of the real lessons that should have been learned were learned or admitted. And so you know that their real thing is like, well, we actually had it all right, but we just didn't do it hard enough and fast enough.
Yeah, right.
You know that's exactly their mentality.
I agree with you. I'm 100% on the same page. There's no admission of guilt. And I think you also missed they shouldn't be printing all that money and they shouldn't be shutting down all these businesses. Those are 2 things. Like, there's so many things you can take from this. Maybe we shouldn't be carding people. Maybe we shouldn't be charging people that are going for a walk with their dog. You fucking lunatics. So yeah, I'm 100% on the same page. The last thing you really want is to centralize more power with a group that did everything the wrong way and there's no admission of guilt and no accountability.
Next story for the day, we've got Liberals pouring billions into EVs, but Canadians aren't buying into the green transition. Despite billions in government subsidies aimed at making electric vehicles the dominant mode of transportation by 2035, sales have plummeted in 2024. Compared to last year, EV sales have been cut in half, lagging significantly behind gas-powered vehicles. The Canadian government, along with provincial governments, has committed a hefty $28.2 billion to subsidize EV and battery production facilities. However, the Parliamentary Budget Office estimates it will take 20 years just to break even on this investment, and this doesn't include the additional $5 billion spent on new Honda EV manufacturing plant. Major automakers like Tesla have just laid off 10% of their workforce. Ford has delayed productions on EVs and are responding by scaling back due to weak sales. General Motors even abandoned its initial target of building 400,000 EVs in 2024, and even car rental companies are skeptical, with Hertz selling off a third of its EV fleet. So why is our government investing so heavily in a dying market?
I think at this point, climate change has become pivotal for the Liberal platform. And this is one of their most front-facing, like citizen-facing initiatives, right? And they're very, very pot committed here. So I think that they're going to continue to beat this dead horse. And because they have put so much money into the infrastructure, there's like literally a 0% chance they'll admit any fault. Now, them not admitting fault is not such a big deal. We're pretty used to that. The problem that I have here is that I think it's going to lead to the inevitable waste of more taxpayer dollars being invested into this infrastructure, even though it's something Canadians don't want. And there was actually one other thing that kind of popped up just yesterday that I thought was interesting too here is, I don't know if you saw, the United States put a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. So it used to be 25%. They hiked it up to 100%. Now, I'm not sure what that tariff number is. All I know is they multiplied it by 4 and it's at 100%. Maybe that means 100% of the cost of the vehicle. I don't know, which is wild if that's what it is. So Canada is now looking at doing the same thing. So Chrystia Freeland basically says, look, we don't want Chinese oversupply in the EV market, so we may be adding tariffs and doing the same thing. But I find this really, really, really alarming. And maybe you could shed some light on why this is a good strategy if you think it is, but I don't, because they want everyone to drive EVs by 2035. They're investing all this money into the infrastructure, but they're taxing the cheapest solution out of the market by saying it's to safeguard our economy. So who is it really helping? Because the cost of life is already completely unaffordable in this country.
I think it's been a bait and switch the entire time. I think their actual goal has just been to limit private vehicle ownership, like they've stated in the C40 initiatives. Anybody can go look up these documents. It's called Urban Consumption in a 1.5 Degree World is the name of the report that they did. And yeah, they've outright stated that they do not want private car ownership. And I think they knew that they couldn't get people on board with that idea at face value. So what they need to say is, well, we want everybody to switch over to EVs, but then full well knowing that there isn't enough EVs, or that there won't be enough EVs for everybody to be able to own an EV vehicle. And, you know, even too as well, like, we don't have the resources for this, because even the amount of EVs that they're talking about would require a 15.3% increase in electricity demand. So on one hand, we're shutting down coal plants. We're shutting down our oil and gas sectors. We're not drilling anymore. We're not doing any of that. So we're putting more and more strain on our electric grids, but then also our solution to climate change demands more from those. So it doesn't add up. And so I don't think the real goal has ever actually been to get people over onto EV.
Did you see the cap, actually, the proposed cap on emissions for the oil and gas industry? Trudeau's cap, the ramifications of that, I believe it's over the next 10 years, would be a loss of $247 billion plus another $75 billion in investment, and it would sacrifice 51,000 jobs.
Yep.
You kind of go, which country are you working for, dude? What's happening here? Because none of this is to benefit Canadians. But that's actually a really good point. I agree with you. They make it impossible to get a hold of them because the volume's not there, and then they price people out of the market so they can't even buy them, so people look for alternative solutions. Yeah, it's a good point. It's horrifying, but it's a good point.
I think they are very much operating on the mentality of what is called degrowth. And the idea is that humanity's population is way too big to support, from a resource perspective and for climate change and all of this. And therefore, we need to degrow. We need to limit that. And I mean, you can even look it sounds conspiratorial, but Harvard has released papers on why we need to go down the degrowth path. And then too, you even look at, say, a lot of the think tanks that these people listen to, like the World Economic Forum and our liberal governments, where they get their ideas from, where there's a guy named Dennis Meadows from the Club of Rome, who has been talking about since the 1960s that humanity is growing at a rate that is going to run out of resources, and therefore we need to actually cull the population, essentially. Have you ever seen that? Did I ever show you that clip of him?
I've heard of him, but I haven't seen that, no.
Listen to this psychopath. Again, these are people that are in leading think tanks, in even actually he's a agenda contributor for the World Economic Forum.
In one way or another, we are so far, globally, we are so far above the population and the consumption levels which can be supported by this planet that I know in one way or another it's going to come back down. So I don't hope to avoid that. I hope that it can occur in a civil way. I mean civil in a special way. Peaceful. Peace doesn't mean that everybody's happy, but it means that conflict isn't solved through violence, through force, but rather in other ways. And so that's what I hope for. That we can, the planet can support something like 1 billion people, maybe 2 billion, depending on how much liberty and how much material consumption you want to have. If you want more liberty and more consumption, you have to have fewer people. And conversely, you can have more people. We could even have 8 or 9 billion probably if we have a very strong dictatorship, which is smart. Unfortunately, you never have smart dictatorships. They're always stupid. But if you had a smart dictatorship and a low standard of living, you can have but we want to have freedom and we want to have a high sentence, so we're going to have 1 billion people. And we're now at 7, so we have to get back down. I hope that this can be slow, relatively slow, and that it can be done in a way which is relatively equal, so that people share the experience and you don't have a few rich, trying to force everybody else to deal with it. So those are my hopes. These are pretty pessimistic hopes, but that's what lies ahead.
Yeah, dude.
That is a literal psychotic statement of, well, you know what? Humanity's population is going to decline anyways, so we might as well get ahead of the curve, take it into our own hands, and we hope that we can eliminate 6 or 7 billion people off of this planet civilly. Hopefully they can be done in it can be equitable death for everybody. You're just like, what the hell is going on in your guys' heads? And I think something to point out here too is just because certain people in these areas push these ideas doesn't mean that it's inevitably going to happen. There's 100% going to be a lot of pushback. It's not, they won't be able to do something like that civilly, but we need to understand that, especially when it comes to the climate change stuff, that is the mentality that is underlying a lot of it.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. You see I've seen a lot of mixed opinions on the volume of people that can survive on the earth comfortably. I've seen some of it say, it's 1 billion. Some people say it's 10 billion. Some people say it's 100 billion. It's changed dramatically because we have so much space and just how you manage your resources. But it's pretty alarming when you hear someone say something like that. And the reason I say that is because there's no way that that guy can have enough information to make that decision to say those things. So what I mean to say is it's not objective. That's an opinion. That's all that is, because there's no way the guy has enough data points to make that call. And if he did, I don't think he'd say that number. I think it's significantly higher. That's my opinion, of course. But that's why I find it pretty alarming, is that those are the people that are contributing to how our world is run, and these global governing bodies that are trying to grab at more power. And these are the ideas that they have. And again, I think it's very unsubstantiated. So yeah, it's psychopathic, but it's wild, man.
Well, and it's important to note too, a lot of their predictions have been false. A lot of these people in these circles, these think tanks, they were claiming that international oil reserves were going to run out by the 90s. It's like, well, we're 30 years later and still no sign of depletion on that end. They continually say that we're going to run out of resources, and continually those forecasts don't come true. So it's like, yeah, I think, hey, if you guys are going to say that we need to reduce the population, you better have a pretty good fucking track record of getting things right, and they don't.
Totally agreed. Yeah, and it's interesting, when you apply for a job, they want to see your resume and they want to call your references, right? They want to see, have you done this before, and are you capable? Or you have an education, you have a certificate saying, here's what I'm capable of. And then they throw you in the mix to see how it works. None of these people are qualified to make these decisions or do these things, yet they're the ones that are grabbing at more power and trying to run the world. It's kind of weird how those standards don't apply the further up the chain you go. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But anyway, just sort of an offshoot thought.
No, I agree. Last topic for the day, we've got ahead of Pride Month, the school walkouts are being planned and parents discuss LGBT lessons in schools. So June is Pride Month, which often means LGBT-related events and discussions at schools across Canada. This year, some school walkouts are planned to coincide with Pride flag-raising ceremonies at the beginning of the month. There has been a growing push for increased parental rights in Canada. New Brunswick and Saskatchewan have passed laws preventing schools from keeping a student's gender transition a secret from parents. Alberta has proposed rules requiring parental opt-in for gender or sexuality-related lessons. And former teacher Chanel Pafal told summit attendees that gender ideology is increasingly taught in Canadian schools without parental consent. She advised parents to inspect their kids' schools for projects or artwork on these topics, and she mentioned that LGBT terms are sometimes included in morning announcements during Pride Month. So will this be the beginning of the end for indoctrinating children with this nonsense?
I don't think it's the beginning of the end. I think you've had a growing faction of people fighting it for a very long time because they recognize it for what it is. But one of the things I wanted to emphasize is sort of the significant gap in communication and understanding between these groups. And the reason I say that is because I think people are very confused about people that are pushing back against these things and then how they feel about the group, the LGBT group in general. So the vast majority of us don't really care what another adult does with their life. Literally do whatever the hell you want. Just don't harm other people. It's kind of the way most of us see things. I would say the significant majority. If you want to celebrate Pride, by all means, go enjoy yourself. I do not care, right? Very much a live and let live sort of strategy for life. However, Pride Month in schools, it really no longer represents this philosophy. I believe that our educators have crossed a very bright red line, in pushing sort of inappropriate sexual education and gender ideology onto our children. For starters, this is harming another person. Like I said, you can't harm other people. That's exactly what this is. Children are far too impressionable, they're vulnerable, and they're incapable of understanding these issues, let alone making secret life-altering decisions with public school educators, right? It really doesn't make any sense. The problem is this widespread sentiment is unfairly labeled as anti-LGBT plus or harmful or xenophobic or homophobic or something like this. And the idea is that somehow wanting to protect your kids from this predatory behavior is now considered bigotry. I get my point is that pride in being whoever you want is not the problem. It has never really been the problem for most of us. The issue is that this once sort of unifying strategy has permeated into the education system year round, which has now turned Pride Month into a battleground for many parents. And that's why things are happening the way they're happening. So it's not that these people are bigots or they're against any of the LGBT agenda aside from leave kids alone. That is the big push for most of these parents. I have a couple of other issues like the cross use of washrooms and stuff like that. And then trying to force me to call you whatever you want. I think that's fucking preposterous. But the large majority of these parents just want you to leave their kids alone. Otherwise, do whatever the fuck you want.
I think until educators can start improving the general literacy and ability of these kids, which is actually going the opposite direction. Kids these days are doing worse in test scores for all of the above. Until you do that, hey, all this bullshit, even if I agreed with you, that goes all the way to the bottom of the list of priorities when it comes to educating a child. Give them the tools that they need to actually thrive in a functioning society where they can do simple things like math. I mean, and I'm not even shitting on these kids because we have removed their access to good education, but it's very stark when you go talk to one of these kids at, let's say, a fast food place, and they tell you your total, you give them a $20 bill, they hit the $20 thing on the cash register, it spits out what they're supposed to give back to you, and then you go, oh wait, actually, sorry, I do have the change here to make that even. You give it to them, like, let's say the extra 20 cents or whatever to get a $5 bill back rather than $4.80 in change. You give them that 20 cents and the kids just look at you like, I have no idea what you're expecting of me right now. And then you can tell them like, oh, actually, I'm giving you an extra 20 cents so that you can just give me a $5 bill. And they're like, I don't think that's how that works.
Yeah, they're like, no.
I literally had to argue with one time to be like, no. Okay, give me the $4.80.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to take this 20 cents and add it to the $4.80. Can I now have a $5 bill back instead? And they were still like, I don't know what's happening here, pal. And you're like, this is like basic level math.
Yeah,
but
that's wild.
But until they can do shit like that, until they can write properly, like it's so insane. I've been reading this book on Friedrich Nietzsche. And his upbringing.
Guy.
It is. And but you in this book they have excerpts from his writing of his diary when he was like 11 years old, man. Genius level stuff. And obviously like this is a different case than just your average child. But you look at that, or whether you look at even what was the guy's name? Jacob something Smith that started Mormonism. He was 15.
He was a child.
He was 15 when he did that. And you look at this, or even like the founding fathers, all the founding fathers.
Was it Mormonism or was it Scientology?
No, it was Scientology was L. Ron Hubbard.
Ah, okay, yeah, sorry.
And he was much older.
Yeah.
But then you look at even the founding fathers, they were all in their early 20s and they were like having this like extreme vision for the future, and they were extremely well spoken and articulate. Or even fucking Alexander the Great. He had like conquered the entire world by the time he was like 22.
Yeah, he crushed.
And so like, and then you look at the kids nowadays and you just go like, I don't see kids like that popping up. Like, I don't see any genius level teenagers coming out these days. Like, I mean, maybe there is, but like the average one, they're definitely like, and again, I'm not trying to just shit on them because we have failed them, but they're worse than our generations were.
Yeah, the entire education system now is very broken. We talked about this last time. I think it was 55% of Canadians polled thought the education system was going in the wrong direction. One other thing I actually saw the other day is there's been a slow rise in homeschooling in the United States. And if I remember correctly, it was like 500,000, then the next decade like 600,000, the next decade like 800,000, and then by 2000 it was 1.5 million. Now it's over 5 million. It grew exponentially because so many people are realizing how broken the system is and it's not giving their kids the tools that they want. Like, even if it wasn't really cultivating the talent that these young minds have or fostering them to become great, people would probably still just let it go because it's a free babysitter. Free. You pay taxes, but it's a free babysitter. But now with all this ideological crap, now they're just like, hey, that you crossed the line. There's just no way. Like I was saying, you crossed the bright red line. I can't put my kids through this because it will scar them. It will not help them. So I totally understand, man. But I agree with you. We're not only fucking up this generation in terms of the education system, but you look at the opioid use, you look at everything else that's happening. It's like, what are we doing right for this generation? Like you look at like all these generations have their cross to bear. And I make the joke last time, it wasn't really a joke, it's the truth, that for this one, it's mental health. But I meant for the current generation that is in their young adulthood. What are we doing right for, kids that are 6 to 15 right now? What at all? Because
Literally nothing.
That's what I mean. Like not one thing in this country is going right for those people. What a sad state of the world.
Yeah, and I've even seen it with friends and stuff. Like I have a couple people that I'm close to now that have shared insane stories. So yeah, one was I had somebody, they were babysitting some kids within my family, and they were walking down the street, and the little girl said, "Is that a girl or a boy?" And they pointed to somebody on the street, and then her brother then answered, "If you don't know, you just assume it's a they, them." Okay, so that's baked into their head. These kids are like early grade school years. So that's already getting into them. And then even I had another friend that was telling me they got pulled into school, and the teachers and the administrators said that, well, your daughter is playing a lot with the boys on the playground, so we think she might actually be expressing her true gender identity. Do you think that maybe we should explore that with her a little bit? And the dad literally went straight and he pulled the kid out and was like, "We're going home.
Bye."
Wow. But and then even he said, he's just like, "You guys are crazy. Like my daughter has 3 brothers." So it's like, yes, she probably feels extremely comfortable socializing.
What a huge thing to miss. Like, what's the family like she grows up in? No, we don't care about that. That's irrelevant. What do you mean?
It's like she spent her entire childhood playing with three boys. So yes, it makes perfect sense that she would be completely comfortable playing with boys on the playground. But all of a sudden, that means she's a boy. Oh my God, man,
that is so wild, dude.
Yeah. So. Yeah, if your kids are in public schools, consider pulling them out for sure at this point. I mean, if you've got the means, I totally understand that not a lot of people do, but
well, you know what? Actually, to say there is a large parallel economy growing to educate your children in whether it's private school or whether it's homeschooling. What I'm seeing a lot of is like small groups of homeschooling where they're all pitching in on a teacher, so it's costing you a lot less. Like, yeah, sure, there's no good system to save on the taxes right now because it is what it is, but for like a relatively insignificant amount of money compared to what it would cost to put your kid in private school 10 years ago, you can get a reasonable education for your kids where they're not indoctrinated with this crap. I think you just have to go and look for those solutions.
100%. Anything else you wanted to add today, dude?
Nope, that's everything. All
right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our website to sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 6 days a week, blendrnews.com, BLENDR news.com, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.